Hello. Hello, and welcome to part 12 in Bible Mandela Effects. If you're unfamiliar with Mandela Effects, I recommend that you watch parts 1 through 11 and the introduction to become familiar with the topic. Today we're going to start with our first verse, Hebrews 11:34. Let's read this verse together in the New International Version. Quench the fury of the flames and escape the edge of the sword, whose weakness was turned to strength and who became powerful in battle and routed foreign enemies. Okay, so talking about in the past how the heroes, Christian heroes of the past, the saints had conquered and persevered during hard times. So that's the New International Version. Now look at the wording in the King James Version. I'm going to scroll down to the King James Version. Just look at the wording of it, especially at the end of the verse. Quench the violence of fire, escape the edge of the sword, out of weakness were made strong, wax valiant in fight, turn to flight the armies of the aliens. It just sounds strange, the wording of it. You also see armies of the aliens in the New King James. It's just an unusual wording. It could have been worded much better, and you see other translations fight foreign armies. That makes more sense as I read it. So let's look at the original Greek to see how it is worded. Extinguish the power of fire. Here we have the original Greek, what it looks like, and then a straight word for word translation. And then translators will take this and try to write it so that it flows smoother in the language that they're translating into. But reading it word for word, extinguished the power of fire, fled the mouths of swords, were empowered from out of weakness, became strong in war. The camps they leaned of aliens. So the aliens, the word aliens is the key word. And the word alotrios, meaning someone foreign or strange. When it says armies of the aliens in the original verse, it just sounds strange. So I wanted to cover that simply because it sounds unusual, the way that it flows. The next one, Job 19:23. This one is an interesting Mandela effect. New International Version. Oh, that my words were recorded, that they were written on a scroll. So Job is talking about how he wished that his words were written down. And the word scroll makes sense because Job, the oldest book of the Bible, being an ancient book, he would want his words to be written down on a scroll. That's what it would have had back then, papyrus scroll. But when you scroll on down, the English Standard says written on a book. The New Living Translation says inscribed on a monument. Here you see inscribed on a book. Berean study, book. And the King James Bible, New King James, says book. Many translations say book. This is intriguing to me because they didn't have books during the time that Job would have written this. They wrote on papyrus, on scrolls. So I wanted to look in the Greek to see what it says. And it says, for what that might be given to be written my words and to put them on a scroll for the eon, for the years. And when I saw the word scroll, let's look at the original word for scroll. The word that's written is biblion. That means on paper, papyrus scroll. Now the book, the word book specifically is biblos, which means more specifically paper or book. They're interchangeable. But here, the specific word that's used is biblion, which more specifically translates to papyrus scroll. So that to me is a Mandela effect because the exact Greek word biblion is talking about more of a scroll than a book, which would have been the word biblos. So with that in mind, when you go back to the original verse, it's just interesting. So many of them say book. The King James says book because I remember it saying scroll. And then the New Living Translation, how in the world do you get monument out of it? It's not monument, it's a scroll or a book. At least it's something like that. So even monument seems strange. So I just wanted to mention that one as a Mandela effect. And then the third one, now this one is a little weaker, but I wanted to include it anyway. Acts 17:28. For in him we live and move and have our being. As some of your own poets have said, we are his offspring. And the word poets, when I read that at first in the King James, notice every translation says poets. Even the King James says, as certain also of your own poets have said, for we are also his offspring. I thought it said prophets, and that's the problem is that my memory says, was it not prophets? Now, when you go back and look at some of the books of the Bible, talk about we are his offspring. In the book of Psalms, which Psalms is poetry, Psalms 95:7 says in the New International Version, for he is our God, and we are the people of his pasture, the flock under his care. Today, if odds, we belong to him. And then another passage, again, out of a book of poetry, Psalm 100, verse 3. Know that the Lord is God. It is he who made us. We are his. We are his people, the sheep. In poetry, that is talking about we belong to God. So, going back to the Greek, looking at the words, in him, for in him, when you put those the way we would read it, we live and move and are, as also some of the among you the poets have said, for of him also a family we are. So even when you go back to the original Greek, the word seems to be poet. And it makes sense because there are poetry verses out of Psalms that do validate what that passage is and that it did come from a poet. So just wanted to mention that, as this is a weak Mandela effect because it's easy to get the words prophet, poet mixed up, and we may think that it was prophet, but very easily could have been poets all along. But I just wanted to throw out strong ones and weak ones so that you can see just how many Mandela effects there are in the Bible. Some of them can be explained away, some of them are harder to figure out what's going on. But just wanted to show it to you as another example of a Mandela effect.